The sun crept over the towering skyline of New York City, its golden light spilling across the glass windows of the Carter penthouse. The apartment sat high above the city, a symbol of everything Olivia and Daniel had built together. A life of ambition, success, and love. Or so Olivia believed. She stood barefoot in their sleek, modern kitchen, the cold marble floor sending a slight chill up her spine. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint hint of Daniel's cologne, still lingering from the morning. She cradled her ceramic mug, absently staring out at the city as she scrolled through emails on her phone. Work was always waiting. Behind her, Daniel emerged from the hallway, already dressed for the day. His navy blue suit fit him perfectly, tailored to exude quiet authority. He adjusted his tie in the mirror by the entryway, his sharp green eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "Big day?" he asked, his voice smooth as he walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Olivia leaned into him, closing her eyes for a brief moment. His warmth, his touch, it was familiar, comforting. "Huge," she murmured. "If we land this client, it could mean a whole new level for the firm." "You'll land it." He pressed a lingering kiss to her neck, his lips brushing against her skin in a way that made her shiver. "You always do." She turned in his arms, resting a hand against his chest. "And you? What's on your schedule today?" He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Meetings. Calls. The usual." He gave her that easy, charming smile, the one that could disarm anyone. But there was something in his eyes, something unreadable. Before she could press further, her phone vibrated with an incoming email. Work pulling her back in. Daniel exhaled, stepping back. "I should go." "Wait." She grabbed his wrist gently. "You didn't tell me what you wanted for dinner tonight." He smiled again, but it felt almost distracted. "Surprise me." And with that, he was gone. The first crack. Olivia tried to shake the uneasy feeling that settled in her stomach, but it lingered. Maybe it was the stress of the pitch. Maybe it was nothing. She pushed it aside and dove into work, losing herself in strategy, numbers, and negotiations. Hours blurred together, the city moving at its relentless pace outside her office window. But by 6:15 p.m., when she finally looked up from her laptop, that nagging feeling returned. Daniel hadn't called, hadn't texted. It was unlike him. She reached for her phone and dialed. 2 rings, then voicemail. Her heartbeat quickened. "Secrets in room 214. While Olivia sat in her office, chewing the inside of her cheek, Daniel was across town, parked outside a small, upscale boutique hotel. He drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, glancing at his phone. "Room 214. See you soon. Red heart." The message glowed on the screen, the tiny red heart burning into his mind. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. His heart pounded, not with guilt, but with anticipation. Then he stepped out of the car, doubt creeping in. By the time Daniel walked through the penthouse door later that night, Olivia was already waiting. She sat curled on the couch, a glass of red wine cradled in her hands, the city's lights casting a soft glow behind her. Her eyes flicked up as he entered, and immediately she noticed it. The scent. A different cologne. Not his. Not hers. "You're late," she said casually, swirling the wine in her glass. Daniel loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah." Work ran over. "Clients." She arched a brow. "Clients." "Yeah." Long day. Something in his tone, just a little too rehearsed, too smooth. Her stomach twisted. She took a slow sip of her wine, watching him, studying him. A part of her wanted to let it go, to believe him. But another part of her, the part that had spent years learning how to read people, how to sense the smallest shifts in body language, knew something was off, and that part refused to ignore it. The night passed in uneasy silence. Olivia lay in bed, her body curled away from Daniel's, her mind racing. She could hear his slow, steady breathing beside her, but sleep refused to come. Something was wrong. She could feel in her bones. The scent of unfamiliar cologne still clung to the air, faint but undeniable. The way he had avoided her eyes, the hesitation in his voice. It was like a shadow had passed over their marriage, subtle but chilling. She reached for her phone, staring at the dark screen. Should she ask him outright? Demand the truth? No, not yet. Instead, she would wait, watch, and listen, because lies, no matter how carefully crafted, always unraveled in the end. A familiar stranger. The next morning, Olivia woke to the sound of the shower running. Daniel was already up, steam curling from the half-open bathroom door. She sat up, watching the faint outline of his body through the fogged glass. For a moment, she studied him, the broad shoulders she had traced with her fingertips 1,000 times, the strong arms that had once made her feel safe, the man she had promised forever to. And yet, as he moved beneath the water, he felt like a stranger. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to push the thought away. "Morning," he said when he finally stepped out, towel wrapped around his waist, his damp hair tousled. His usual grin was there, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," she murmured, pretending to check her emails. He kissed her forehead, a gesture that once felt natural but now felt like a mask. "I'll be home late again tonight," he said, moving toward the closet. Olivia kept her expression neutral. "Another client meeting?" He hesitated, just for a second. "Yeah." And there was again that hesitation. A slow, creeping chill ran down her spine. The first step into darkness. After Daniel left, Olivia sat at the kitchen counter, fingers drumming against the marble surface. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend she hadn't noticed the inconsistencies, the quiet shifts in his behavior. But she couldn't. Not when something deep inside her screamed that their life, their perfect life, was starting to crack. By noon, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to confront him. She was going to follow him. A trail of lies. Dressed in black jeans and a fitted blazer, Olivia kept her sunglasses low as she parked a few blocks from Daniel's office. She had never done anything like this before. Never had a reason to. But now, doubt was an open wound, and she needed answers. For the first hour, nothing happened. Daniel's office window was visible from where she sat, and through the glass, she saw him in meetings, pacing with his usual confidence. But at 5:47 p.m., everything changed. Daniel left the building, not in his car but on foot, and he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him. Tall, blonde, a fitted black dress hugging her curves. She laughed at something he said, playfully touching his arm. Olivia's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She wasn't the jealous type. She never had been. But this wasn't just a casual interaction. This was something else. Something dangerous. Room 214. Olivia followed them at a distance, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She watched as Daniel led the woman into the same boutique hotel she had noticed on his credit card statement a few months ago, a charge he had dismissed as a work dinner. Her stomach clenched as she parked across the street, hands shaking. They disappeared inside. She sat frozen, unable to move, unable to think. Then, she forced herself to get out of the car. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked into the hotel lobby, her pulse a deafening roar in her ears. The receptionist barely looked up as she approached. "Excuse me," Olivia said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm meeting a friend. You just checked in." A man in a navy suit with a blonde woman. The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't give out guest information." Olivia forced a polite smile, slipping a crisp $100 bill onto the counter. "I just need a room number." The woman hesitated again, then sighed, lowering her voice. "Room 214. Olivia's stomach twisted. She turned and walked toward the elevators, her body numb, her mind racing. Daniel was upstairs. With her. This was the moment everything changed. This was the moment her perfect illusion shattered. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft chime, enclosing Olivia in a space that felt smaller than it should have. The walls pressed in around her, and for a moment, she struggled to breathe. Room 214. Daniel was in room 214. With her. A part of her wanted to turn around, to leave before she uncovered the truth she already felt in her bones. Because once she saw it, there would be no going back. But the other part, the part that had spent years building a life with him, trusting him, demanded answers. The doors slid open. Olivia stepped out, her heels silent against the plush carpet. The hallway stretched before her, dimly lit, the numbers on the doors glowing faintly. 210, 212. She stopped in front of 214, her heart pounding so hard it felt like her ribs might crack under the pressure. A muffled laugh came from inside. A woman's laugh. Olivia's fingers curled into fists. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen in place. Then, she raised a hand and knocked. The moment of truth. Silence. A long, stretching silence. Then the sound of hurried movement. Footsteps, fabric rustling. Olivia could picture it too clearly. Daniel scrambling. The woman looking at him in confusion. The door opened just a crack, and Daniel's face appeared, his expression unreadable. For a split second, they just stared at each other. Then, his face twisted into something between shock and panic. Olivia. His voice was tight, forced. She didn't blink. Are you going to invite me in? His grip on the door tightened. What are you doing here? Behind him, Olivia saw movement. A blonde woman in nothing but a silk robe, her back turned as she grabbed something from the bed. Every nerve in Olivia's body screamed. Who is she? Olivia's voice was eerily calm, controlled. Daniel hesitated. Just for a second. That second was enough. The unraveling. Olivia pushed past him before he could stop her, stepping inside. The air smelled of perfume, of sweat, of them. The blonde turned, startled, clutching her robe closed. She was beautiful, the kind of beauty that was effortless, the kind that made Olivia's stomach twist in ways she didn't understand. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Liv, this isn't what it looks like. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Really? Because it looks exactly like what it is. Silence. The blonde woman cleared her throat, stepping forward. I didn't know. Don't. Olivia cut her off, her eyes locked on Daniel. You don't owe me an explanation. He does. Daniel swallowed hard. I can explain. She tilted her head, crossing her arms. Then explain. A beat of silence. Then another. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. And suddenly, Olivia knew. There was no explanation. No excuse. Because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice. The realization settled over her like ice. She had spent years believing in them. In him. And all along, he had been lying to her. Daniel stepped toward her, his voice lower now, pleading. Liv, please, let's talk about this. Olivia exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, she reached down, slipped off her wedding ring, and placed it on the nightstand. Daniel's face paled. Consider this my explanation, she whispered. Then she turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the wreckage of what they once were. The hotel hallway felt impossibly long as Olivia walked away from room 214, each step echoing like a drumbeat of finality. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just moved forward, steady and deliberate, as if the gravity of what had just happened hadn't yet sunk in. But it would. And when it did, she knew it would crush her. The elevator doors opened before her, and she stepped inside. The moment they closed, sealing her away from the scene of her marriage's destruction, her breath came in ragged gasps. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the button for the lobby. She had always thought she would know what she would do if this ever happened. Leave. Walk away. Never look back. But now that it had, she felt lost. Because it wasn't just about Daniel. It was about everything. The life they had built. The memories. The plans for the future. And now it was all gone. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the lobby, and Olivia forced herself to straighten. The receptionist barely glanced up as she walked past, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Outside, the city pulsed with life, utterly indifferent to the fact that her world had just imploded. Nowhere to go. Olivia sat behind the wheel of her car, staring blankly at the road ahead. Where was she supposed to go? Back home? To their home? The thought of stepping into that space, of seeing the remnants of their life together, made her stomach churn. Her mother's house? No, that would mean questions she wasn't ready to answer. A friend's place? She had friends, of course, but none who had been through this. None who would understand. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly alone. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she shifted into gear and drove. The breaking point. She didn't know how long she drove. The city blurred past her, neon lights reflecting off the rain-slicked streets. At some point, she pulled into a quiet parking lot near the river, the water shimmering under the streetlights. She turned off the engine and sat in silence, the weight of everything finally pressing down on her chest. And then just like that, it broke. A sob tore through her, raw and unrestrained. She gripped the steering wheel, her body shaking as the reality of what had just happened crashed over her in violent waves. He had cheated on her, her husband, the man she had loved, trusted, built a life with. And he hadn't even fought for her. Not really. He had just stood there, watching her leave. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, gasping for air. She had been so blind. Had there been signs? Of course there had. The late nights, the sudden distance, the cologne that wasn't his. But she had ignored them, because loving someone meant trusting them. And Daniel had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The sobs came harder now, uncontrollable and raw. She let them, because for the first time in hours, maybe in years, she wasn't pretending. A call she never expected. The vibration of her phone startled her. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket, sniffing as she glanced at the screen. Daniel. Her stomach twisted violently. Her thumb hovered over the decline button, but she hesitated. Did she want to hear what he had to say? Did she want to give him the chance to spin more lies? Her jaw tightened. No, not tonight. She turned off her phone and threw it onto the passenger seat. For once, Daniel didn't get to control the narrative. What now? Olivia leaned back against the seat, exhaling shakily. She had no idea what came next. Would she confront him again? Would she demand answers? Would she file for divorce? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't go back to the way things were. Because after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. The city stretched out before Olivia, its lights flickering against the black canvas of the sky. She sat in her car, the engine silent, her hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. She had turned off her phone. She couldn't handle Daniel's words right now. What would he even say? I can explain. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Lies. Excuses. None of it would change the fact that he had made a choice that shattered everything. She let out a slow, trembling breath, trying to will herself into something resembling composure. But inside, she was a storm of rage, of grief, of disbelief that the man she had trusted most had become a stranger. And yet, beneath the rage and heartbreak, a quieter, more dangerous emotion curled its way through her, doubt. Because no matter how much she wanted to walk away, to erase Daniel from her life, the truth was that part of her still wanted to understand. Why? Why had he done this? Had she not been enough? Had she been too busy with work? Had she missed something? Something so fundamental that it had pushed him into another woman's arms? The questions clawed at her, refusing to let go. The weight of memory. Without realizing it, Olivia found herself driving. She didn't know where she was going until she pulled onto a familiar street, the one lined with cherry blossom trees, their petals now long gone, replaced by the deep greens of summer. Their street, their home. She stared at it through the windshield, her heart a heavy, aching thing in her chest. How many nights had she and Daniel come home here, exhausted but happy, collapsing onto the couch with takeout containers between them? How many mornings had they spent wrapped in each other's arms, their laughter filling these walls? Had any of it been real? Or had she been living a lie this whole time? She killed the engine but didn't move. The house was dark, but Daniel's car was in the driveway. He was inside, waiting, or acting like nothing had happened. The thought made her stomach turn. The confrontation. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped out of the car. The night air was cool against her skin as she crossed the driveway, her footsteps deliberate. Her keys felt foreign in her hand as she unlocked the door. Inside, the silence was suffocating. She took a step forward, and then another. And then she saw him. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, his head in his hands. He didn't look up at first, but when he did, something flickered in his eyes. Relief? Guilt? Olivia, he breathed, standing as if to move toward her. She held up a hand. Don't. He stopped, his jaw tightening. You turned off your phone. You think I wanted to hear from you? Her voice was sharp, edged with something dangerously close to hatred. He exhaled heavily. I don't know what to say. She let out a bitter laugh. That's a first. You seemed to have plenty to say when you were sneaking around behind my back. Daniel flinched. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Her voice rose, years of swallowed pain and betrayal finally breaking free. Tell me, Daniel. Tell me what part of this wasn't you choosing to sleep with another woman while I was here. She gestured wildly around the house, believing in us. He dragged a hand down his face. It wasn't about you. She barked out a hollow laugh. Oh, so you just accidentally fell into bed with someone else? Olivia, stop. His voice was low, almost pleading. No, she snapped. I won't stop, because this is my life too, and I deserve the truth. A long silence stretched between them, and then, I was unhappy. His words landed like a slap. Olivia's breath caught. Unhappy, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't mean I don't love you. I do, but something between us changed. We got so caught up in everything else. Work, life. It felt like we were just coexisting. Her chest ached. So instead of talking to me, you cheated? He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But it wasn't about wanting someone else. It was about wanting to feel like someone wanted me. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Do you think I didn't feel the same way sometimes? She whispered. Do you think I didn't notice the distance? But I didn't cheat, Daniel. I fought for us. I believed in us. He closed his eyes, as if pained by her words. I hate myself for what I did. Good, she bit out. Because I hate you for it too. The words cut through the air, final and irreversible. Daniel's face crumpled for a second, just a second, before he schooled his expression. Olivia, his voice broke. Please don't let this be the end. She stared at him, at the man she had loved for so long, at the man she no longer knew. Then, quietly, she said, It already is. And with that, she turned and walked away again. But this time she didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind Olivia, sealing the past inside with Daniel. She stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against her flushed skin, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter her ribs. But she kept walking. Her car sat in the driveway, the same way it always had. But everything felt different now. She wasn't just leaving for work or a quick errand. She was leaving him. She gripped the door handle, hesitating for the briefest moment. Would he follow her? Would he chase her down, beg her to stay? Do I want him to? No, because even if he did, it wouldn't change anything. The damage was already done. She slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with hands that still trembled. The house loomed in her rearview mirror, its windows dark, its walls heavy with the ghosts of everything they had built together. But she didn't belong there anymore. With one last breath, she started the engine and drove away, unraveling the future. Olivia didn't know where she was going. Her mother's house? No, she wasn't ready for the questions, the pity in her mother's eyes. A friend's place? Maybe. But she couldn't bear the thought of explaining everything just yet. Instead, she found herself driving toward the only place that had ever truly been hers. Her old apartment. It had been years since she had lived there, before she and Daniel had moved in together, before they had merged their lives into one. But the familiarity of it called to her now, a reminder of who she was before him. She pulled into the parking lot, her headlights illuminating the worn brick exterior. The landlord had always liked her. Maybe he'd let her crash there for a few nights until she figured out what came next. Because she had to figure it out. She wasn't just a woman who had been cheated on. She wasn't just Daniel's wife. She was Olivia Bennett, and she refused to let this break her. The morning after, she barely slept. Her mind replayed everything. The hotel, the confrontation, the way Daniel had looked at her when she said, "It already is." Was it really? The thought gnawed at her as she stared at the ceiling of her old apartment, listening to the hum of the city outside. Could she ever forgive him? Could she ever trust him again? Would she want to? The questions had no answers. But one thing was clear. She couldn't make this decision based on emotion alone. So she did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She prayed. Not for Daniel. Not for their marriage. For clarity. For the strength to make the right choice, whatever that might be. A new beginning. By morning, Olivia had made a decision. She wasn't going back. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Daniel had made his choice, and now she was making hers. She packed a small bag, just enough to get by for a few days, and left the apartment. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing. It was forward. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated, then pulled it out. A message from Daniel. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve another chance. But I need you to know that I love you. And I always will. She stared at the words, feeling nothing. Then, without a second thought, she deleted the message. Because she was done looking back. She had a future to build. One without him. And this time, it would be hers alone.